This is A New Angle, a show about cool people doing awesome things in and around Montana. I'm your host, Justin Angle. This show is supported by First Security Bank, Blackfoot Communications, and the University of Montana College of Business. Hey folks, welcome back, and thanks for tuning in. Today is our January edition of Incentives and Instincts, a recurring series in which I speak with economist and friend Bryce Ward about some of the broader challenges facing our society. Bryce, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you, Justin.
So, as it is a tradition with this series, we do a prediction show in the January episode. We revisit our 2024 predictions and make some new ones for the coming year. I know this is your favorite part, but for an economist who hates making predictions, I think you're going to enjoy this little review we do of 2024.
I did not go back and look. I have literally no idea what I predicted in 2024, so please enlighten me.
Well, I came with a receipt, so let's take it away. 2024 predictions. Bryce, your prediction for the economy, we would return to some sense of normalcy. You used the word that the economy would be boring and that it would hum along. I think those look pretty good.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah. My prediction in the economy was some major consequence for Elon Musk. At the time, there was reports of prolific drug use and other abuses of power and all sorts of things that led me to think that some negative consequence would come about. Man, I got that wrong. I guess when you have that kind of money and power, you can bend the future to your will. It's reported that he invested about $250 million in the Trump campaign, and depending on when you measure it, it looks like his net worth has increased by almost $250 billion. So pretty good return on that investment for him.
Crazy.
Politics predictions. Bryce, you made news by saying there was a strong chance that one of the two leading candidates at this time in January 2024 would not make it to November.
I really predicted that?
You did.
Wow.
You did. So ding, ding, ding on that one.
Wow. This is great.
Yes. So I predicted that Biden would get reelected. So another massive fail for me. Technically, he did not lose, but I didn't predict that. I just predicted he would get reelected. Anyway, and I offered one more prediction on culture. I predicted some of the far left capture of college campuses would soften. I think that began to play out over the course of the year. We'll see.
I think you're probably right that it did soften some. So certainly there was a backlash to things like DEI statements and, some of that type stuff. So I would give yourself some credit for that.
Yeah. So I think that prediction looks decent and it's one to keep an eye on.
Yeah.
Okay. Ready for 2025? All right, here we go. Let's start with the economy. What do you predict for 2025?
I think it's more of the same. I'll double down on the economy will be relatively boring.
Okay.
To the extent that there's any excitement, the most likely source is the government, doing things that disrupt the economy just humming along. Although you always have to worry about some form of global event. But, given that those are always likely to some degree, I think inflation's still a little too high. And so the Fed will keep trying to tamp that down. I think part of interest rates being too high that go with that, you'll see some more seriousness about deficits in D.C. I don't know if that will translate into policy. We'll get to that in the politics section.
Yep.
But there should be some worry about deficits with interest rates being high.
Yeah.
And rising in recent weeks. But for the most part, the economy's fine.
There's a lot of talk about tariffs. Yeah, I know you have a view on tariffs, but do you have a view on how likely are we talking about tariffs or the threat of tariffs right now?
Who knows? So people will certainly going to talk about tariffs. They'll probably put some tariffs on some things. It's the degree and the precision and the loophole, all of that is what, if you're saying, well, where does the real effect in the economy manifest? Mm-hmm. Well, it manifests on what gets tariff, how big are the tariffs? What are the retaliatory tariffs?
Right.
It's this whole complex cycle, and it all depends on the details that you start with. I don't see any likelihood of, these broad 60% tariffs on China or whatever it is, coming to pass.
And that's where we have to distinguish the difference between policy and sort of threat negotiation, that sort of positioning.
Positioning, right? So how much of this is positioning? How much of this is real?
Any particular things you're looking at in the terms of the economy for Montana?
Montana is in the exact same general boat as the rest of the economy.
Okay.
Income growth is good. Poverty rates are falling. Housing prices are still something that people don't like. Net migration has softened, right? The COVID-induced population boom has slowed, at least as of last summer. So there's a little bit of softening in terms of some of what was bubbling up in recent years. That may just be a result of constrained housing supply. It may also just reflect that whatever moment Montana was having in terms of demand for Montana has shifted. I don't know. But, in terms of, unemployment rates are fine-ish. Income growth was pretty good in 2024, at least the data that we have so far. Not gangbusters, but, kind of growing faster than inflation. And, so, yeah, there's nothing that's like, oh, we got a real big problem. Now, again, there are sectors which are certainly threatened by tariffs.
Sure. And there are individual people that are suffering. And
there's always that, right?
That.
There is always a margin of people who are, they want to do better. But if you're saying just in aggregate, if you're looking at the kind of big picture Montana economy, right? So unemployment rate, income growth, employment growth, prices, all that kind of stuff. It's solid.
Yeah.
It's all pretty solid.
My prediction for the economy is that more and more people, and perhaps those in the media, will begin to realize that the stock market is not the economy. And that really the stock market, in air quotes, as it's sort of popularly known, is just 7 extraordinarily profitable companies that kind of skew our notion of the connection between the stock market and the economy. We're talking about several different things here. And I think it's going to become more clear in the public conception. It's got to become more clear in how people manage investments and they think about diversity in their portfolios and so forth. So we'll see.
Yeah, we have a really long history of people just liking the stock market shortcut. So I don't know how much it can get dislodged. It's certainly right that the stock market is not the economy. It's certainly linked to the economy, but it is not the economy.
And it's interesting, and I'd like us to interview an expert this year about this topic, that the concentration of representation among these 7 companies in these indices is just, I think it's unprecedented in terms of, how long we've been tracking these things, how significant a portion of the S&P, whatever index you want to use, whatever, the percentage of that index that is represented in a small number of companies is unprecedented. Next, we're going to turn to politics. You want to lead us off?
Sure. I don't think you'll see much in terms of major partisan legislation.
Here in Montana or more
Nationally.
broadly? Nationally.
But here as well. Nationally, a 3-seat margin in the House is not enough cushion to do pure partisan legislation.
Okay, so let's make some examples of what would represent a pure partisan piece of legislation.
Well, the Affordable Care Act is the most
exactly.
I think the Tax Cut and Jobs Act was also almost purely partisan.
So you're saying straight vote on party lines, whereas a single
yeah.
party can push through whatever they want.
Yeah, well, essentially a single party basically doing their big thing.
Yep.
Right?
The margins are too thin for that.
A 3-vote margin it's just too hard. In the Senate, you can usually pull that off. A 3-vote margin in the House, the Speaker has a 0-vote margin.
Yeah.
So I don't see how you can get 218 cats on the same page in the House of Representatives.
Yeah.
They'll pass legislation. I'm not saying that they won't pass legislation, but they won't be like we're taking this as far as we can. I just don't think you can get the agreement within the Republican caucus. Usually in the House, you need like 10, 20 votes. Essentially, you have 10 to 20 people that are in highly competitive seats.
Yeah.
Right? That have to basically be like, I can't let you get too far from the median voter because I can't get too far from the median voter.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So if you have a 10, 20 vote margin, well, now you're further afield, right? Okay, great. Like, you guys protect yourselves. don't vote for this. But I don't think that with 3 votes you can get there.
And within this dynamic, do you think that this creates a broader space for collaboration across party lines, or does that become more difficult in this more divided country?
Congress is always passing laws. So you'll still see things happen, but the things that happen will be much more like, yeah, we had to get everybody on board. They won't be like we're just going to do the thing that the other side hates and we'll just ram it through. They will, I'm almost certainly try, but the negotiation required with the parties that are involved, I just don't see how it happens.
Yeah.
3 votes is not enough. 10, you could say, yeah, great. You probably can get there.
And I wonder too, like the incentives for any individual actor. I mean, you could argue that in a 3-vote margin world, the power to any single player increases.
And that's why it breaks down, is that everybody knows that I have effective veto power.
Yeah.
Right? So you better give me what I want. And so the only way to get it across the line is to give everybody what they want. The problem is that what some people want disagrees with other people want.
Right. That's really hard to do.
And so it's hard to get that across the line if you don't have a big cushion. Right? So the Affordable Care Act, I mean, it required 60 senators to even get it to a discussion.
Right. And then Ted Kennedy died, right?
Ted Kennedy died, but this House had already passed, or the Senate already passed the bill.
Okay.
Right? And so, but yeah, I mean, Nancy Pelosi has to herd the caucus. I think there were defections. I'm pretty sure there were defections, but I think it was like 15 or something like that. Right? But they had 20, 30 seat margin.
Yeah.
So you could lose people. Right?
Right.
And that also meant that you could also get them to hold their nose and vote for it, because it was like, unless I had a caucus of people that was big enough, I couldn't block the bill.
Yes.
Right? And now, it takes literally 3 people.
Those larger majorities give license to some players to maybe sort of performatively vote against things to protect them in their own districts, and those possibilities are not there.
Things will happen, the executive can do all sorts of things, but legislatively, I think you're in for a relatively boring period, particularly because, most of the time when the House votes, there's 10 people missing anyway.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So not only do you have to get everybody to vote, you have to get everybody there.
Yep. Well, it's interesting to see if Speaker Johnson can hold his job in this regime as well. Yeah. So it could be boring from a legislative standpoint, and my intuition there is that it could therefore be exciting from a personality standpoint, but we'll have to wait and see.
It depends on what they even try to do, but they have to do something.
Yeah.
Right?
That's
The Tax Cut Jobs Act expires.
Yeah.
Right? So something has to happen in that space, or I guess it doesn't have to happen. There's a default. You just go back to 2017. But presumably people don't want to do that. So they're going to have to try something. So there will be an attempt to do something in that space. The problem is the negotiation that you have to do to get something across the line is, you got a lot of people who are sitting there saying, well, I'm holding cards and I want what I want.
Sure.
And you got to give me these things. And then, you got to convince the other people to say, well, we got to give these guys this thing, so you can't have your thing. And
breaks down quick.
Congressional egos are not the type that we should just assume that you won't have 3 holdouts, right? Basically, if 2% of your caucus is just what's in it for me, and probably more than 2% are in that category, you can't get it across the line.
I think that's well put. My politics prediction, I think Medicaid expansion sticks around in Montana. Bryce, you're an expert in this space, and I feel sheepish bringing this prediction to this venue, but I figured you would at least have a take on it. Can you just define Medicaid expansion?
So the Affordable Care Act created a new group under Medicaid. It is known as Group 8, under whatever title of whatever Social Security Act that created Medicaid. So Group 8 says, if you are an adult, ages 19 to 64, and your income is less than 133% of the federal poverty line, so your family income, with a 5% disregard. So essentially, if your income is less than 139% of the federal poverty line, you qualify for Group 8, and can now enroll in Medicaid, with the exception of you have to be a citizen or a qualified immigrant. You could not qualify under the existing Medicaid rules in your state as of December of 2009, when the Affordable Care Act was passed. Right, so whatever traditional Medicaid pathways your state had established at that point, they persist.
Okay.
There are some asterisks to that. They don't apply to Montana, so I'm not going to get into them. So, so essentially, if you didn't qualify for traditional Medicaid as of 2009, your income is less than 139% of the poverty line, you can now get Medicaid. And importantly, the federal government pays 90% of the cost of your benefits. The state pays 10%, which is different for traditional Medicaid in Montana. There's a rule and it changes over time. But right now, Montana pays about 38% of the cost for traditional Medicaid.
So this went into effect in Montana in 2016. You said there was a simple story. What is that simple story?
So the simple story is that when you pass Medicaid expansion, you allow Medicaid expansion, uninsurance falls by a lot. Roughly half of people who were enrolled in Medicaid expansion would have been uninsured without it. The remainder would have been enrolled in traditional Medicaid, so they shift over, or a small share would have had some form of private insurance. So what happens when you change insurance coverage? Well, people access more healthcare, right? So healthcare utilization goes up. So if you look at like the change in hospital discharges, and you say, well, how did Montana change, and then how did non-expansion states change? So we take the change in Montana, we say, okay, well, that's a plausible effect, but we have states that didn't expand Medicaid. Maybe hospital discharges were going up for some other reason, just in general. So we'll look at those non-expansion states and we'll say, well, what changed there? And we'll subtract the change from Montana, and we'll subtract out the change in non-expansion states, and what's left over is about a 15% increase in hospital discharges in Montana.
Okay.
And so people get more health care. Also importantly, without expansion, a lot of people got care that they couldn't pay for, uncompensated care. So uncompensated care at Montana hospitals is about $225 million a year less than it would be had we not expanded. So you get more utilization of healthcare, more compensation for healthcare. So that means that people generally get healthier. Then on the financial side, your financial health gets better because, most importantly, you don't have medical debt.
Exactly.
So before Medicaid expansion, about 17% of Montana households had medical debt. As of 2023, it was 4%. And when you don't have medical debt, then you don't have bankruptcy, and you get a better credit score, and so you can borrow at a better interest rate.
All these spillover effects, yeah.
Medicaid expansion has been shown to increase food security, housing security, and child support payments. So you get all of those kind of household benefits. And then the healthcare sector, well, it's benefiting from, there's more utilization. We get less uncompensated care. So we get more capacity in our healthcare system, which is, of course, good for the Medicaid expansion beneficiary, but it's also good for everybody,
right?
Particularly in a rural area, right? So it requires a certain level of scale to get a provider to enter into a small market. And when I can say, well, I'm going to get paid more because I'm not going to have as much uncompensated care, I'm going to get higher utilization. So there's some marginal places in Montana that you get marginal increases in care. Well, that benefits everybody, because now instead of having to drive from Lake County to Missoula, well, you can go to someplace in Lake County. To me, as the economist, is the key one, right? If a state doesn't expand Medicaid, if Montana withdraws Medicaid, the federal government doesn't say, well, here's what we were going to spend. Right, here's the $1 billion that we've been spending, or $900 million that we've been spending for Medicaid expansion in Montana. So here's a tax break for Montanans.
You don't get to keep it.
Here's a grant. Go do it. No, it's just leave that money in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
So when we subtract out the federal money that would have come into Montana through some other pathway that we had without Medicaid expansion, we get about $750 million a year of new money. Just like opening a factory adds money to an economy, this is healthcare as a factory. We get 4% more healthcare compensation. Those people then take that money, they go out into the community, they shop at the grocery store, the restaurant. It all circulates around. All this depends on how big is Medicaid, which fluctuates.
Sure.
But if we just use what was it in the last few years, which is $1 billion a year, you get 7,500 jobs are ultimately supported by Medicaid expansion and about $500 million of income. What does it cost, right? Well, the state's got to pay 10% of the cost statutorily. There's a big asterisk to that applies in Montana, which is the federal government pays 100% of the cost at tribal facilities.
Okay.
We have a large tribal population.
So uptake is high on tribal
That's right.
lands.
So instead of paying 10%, Montana pays 9%. So you reduce uninsurance, you get healthcare, financial health, increased provider capacity, which benefits everybody at effectively zero cost to the state.
So what you're describing sounds like a good deal for Montana. And I base my prediction on the notion that it is a good deal, and it seems to have benefited a lot of Montanans. Maybe it's a battle that is not going to occur. We'll see.
Well, the battle will occur, but it's about getting other things.
Got it. Okay.
Right?
Leverage.
It's leverage, right? Okay, you want this. Now I want you to do this other thing. So, and that can always break down.
Mm-hmm.
But if it does break down, it is absolutely Montana shooting itself in the foot.
Okay, I think we have time for one more category. Culture. Do you have a culture-oriented prediction for 2025?
I guess my culture-oriented prediction is that Americans will continue to not spend time engaging in in-person social interaction.
Gosh.
They will continue to isolate themselves at their homes, avoiding restaurants and bars and all forms of social connection.
In spite of all the evidence that you and others have talked about on this show and in other places about the immense benefits of all of those activities.
We are bad at predicting what is good for us at the individual level, and we've clearly crossed tipping points where what you need in terms of the culture to support kind of robust in-person interaction has withered.
Yeah.
And it's particularly withering in younger generations. I'm hopeful that somebody will start figuring out how we actually address this problem.
Yeah.
Because relative to pretty much any problem that we spend time talking about as a society, this is probably bigger than all of them, bigger than whatever tax rates are.
I think that's right. And I think that, I know that you and I will be working to make that prediction not come true, at least in our communities here in 2025. My prediction in terms of culture is related in a way. I feel like it might be intertwined. And that is, I think the terrible effects of sports gambling will start to become more widely known, and hopefully action will be taken. But this thing, we let the genie out of the bottle with legalizing sports betting. I think it's a threat to lives. It's a threat to communities. It's a threat to health on many levels. And I think it's a big threat to sport and athletes. I think we're going to see cases of athletes being manipulated, threatened, and the integrity of the games that we put a lot of attention toward, for better and worse, start to decline. And that's a real problem.
I'll certainly second that the prediction of greater awareness of it as a problem. I think that's will easily come true. The harder thing is, will we do anything about it? That's the bigger question and not easily foreseeable. I'm not sure we're there yet. We already are amassing the evidence, but every day that goes by is an opportunity for the big things that you're talking about to start to bubble up to the surface, right? So some sort of actual betting on sports amongst coaches, players, officials, which again is not unprecedented. It's happened forever. Yeah, it's going to reemerge. So you'll have the manipulation issue, but also just some sort of high profile,
scandal,
personal destruction story.
Yeah, I think that's right. So some kind of grim predictions there. But as we close, resolutions, things you're working about, recommendations, what do you have?
My resolution is actually related to my cultural prediction. It is absolutely to personally buck the trend. I've gone back to the data and said, okay, these are the benchmarks that people were achieving 20 years ago. I need to achieve these benchmarks.
I love this. I love this.
In terms of frequency of in-person social gatherings. I haven't fully committed to if I'm going to actually do it by category. Like I have to have this many dinners with people or this much party or whatever it is. Or if it's just like I have to be in a social situation at this frequency.
Sure.
I'm kind of leaning towards that one because it's a little easier. But yeah, that's my resolution as to. And that's not natural. I'm an introvert. I don't want to reach these levels, but I do know that I feel better when I do. So I'm going to try and commit myself to that.
Very good. And I hope I can share in some of those experiences.
We'll go meet up for drinks.
I've sort of adopted 2 mantras for 2025. And the first is a simple one: less is more. I'm trying to do fewer things and do them better. The second is related, and that is I want to move towards the things that feel good and away from the things that don't. And that's a different sensation than the stress and adapt paradigm that we've talked about before. This is more a quality of life, quality of experience, quality of mind project that I'm working on. And it seems to be off to a reasonably good start, feeling a little bit more spaciousness in 2025, and I want to stick with it.
No, that's good. Those are good. So here, kind of a follow-up question.
Please.
What is the rubric that you use to decide that these are the things that I'm going to do, or these are the things that I'm going to pursue?
Oh, gosh. I mean, that's next level. Maybe I'll have to come back in a month and tell you what my rubric is.
It's just gut at this point?
It is intuition at this point. More to say on that. So as we close here, just a couple of notes for 2025. Our plans are to have more subscriber content. Go ahead and subscribe at anewanglepodcast.com. I'll be doing more writing over there and doing it more frequently. I'm going to start asking questions on that platform in an attempt to initiate dialogue. We're also planning to produce some events in 2025, a series of live public debates. Hard topics navigated in good faith is the general plan. So if you want to support us directly, go visit us at anewanglepodcast.com and subscribe. Thanks to everyone for listening, for sticking with us. We're about to enter year 8. Bryce.
Holy cow.
I know. Bryce, as always, thanks for you, and thanks for your role in this partnership. I greatly appreciate it.
Oh, I'm always happy to be here, Justin. Thanks for having me.
So typically this next section, our listener question, is for paid subscribers only. But this month we're giving it away, just so you get a taste. So here it goes. This is the listener question. This is from an anonymous listener, and it goes like this. In an effort to curate the news without being consumed by it, I'm looking for ways to curate where I seek news without falling into a single source or from a limited vantage point. How do you all go about finding voices you trust, even those with content that may challenge your worldview? Is there a way to discern the integrity of a source without having to be an expert in media? That's a great question. And it's often one I've wondered about you. My perception is that you read widely and from a variety of sources, yet you do use a social media tool for some of your news aggregation. So how do you navigate this space?
You know, it was not an intentional approach, but I'm going to try and lay out what I would recommend. And I want to start with the last piece, which is how do you discern if a source is good? Because I have noticed a couple of things that I end up relying on.
Yeah.
So the first is maybe harder for some people, but it applies to me, is what do they say about things that I know about? If you're looking at sources or writers who are kind of generals, they write about a lot of different things, right? Find them on something where you do have some knowledge and then read that. And then if you're going like, huh? That should be a red flag.
Right. So can they get it right?
Yeah, when I have the ability to evaluate whether they got it right,
yeah.
I have the knowledge, the expertise, whatever it is, great. Then and if you did a good job there, that's a green flag.
That ability or that observation could measure a variety of different things, but let's just assume it measures competence.
Yeah, it's just, can you, and there's layers to it, right?
Sure.
Like at some layers, there's like, when you're kind of trying to summarize a literature or a set of facts or whatever it is, how did you do?
Yeah.
Right? Did you take shortcuts? Did you slant it in one way? Were you fair to all sides? There's also data.
Yeah, and any reporter is going to have to simplify the level of expertise that, in economics or Medicaid expansion, like we talked about a moment ago. So there's going to have to be some. Yeah,
absolutely. There's going to be that is their job, is to, in some sense, condense a lot of stuff down, right?
Yeah.
But even if it's just kind of straight news type stuff, there are type news stories where I have knowledge, right? Where it's like, oh, I know what's going on with that because I know somebody.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And it's like, well, no, they missed this, or and that kind of helps me understand. Okay, the credibility on things where I can evaluate your credibility.
Yeah.
The other thing I've found is, again, applies more for if you're kind of your generalist pundit types who are writing on lots of different things, right? But anybody who you might be reading or you might be concerned that you're reading because they are satisfying your confirmation bias needs.
Yes.
They're telling you what you want to hear. All right. They're telling you that what you already think is right and what the other side thinks is wrong and why they're bad and evil. To the extent that you don't agree with your side on all things, find the thing that you disagree with your side on and read what they have to say about that.
Yes, I like this.
Right? Because if it's like, look, I'm with you on this stuff, but not on that, and I go in and read the stuff on that, and I'm like, well, that's garbage. That should give me a red flag that, well, when the other stuff they may be telling me is also garbage, right? So that's kind of how I approach credibility, and you can also flip this, right? To the extent that, moving back up a question, if you're looking for people who disagree with you, find the thing that they agree with you on, right? Did they do a good job on that? Does it have nuance and perspective and balance and fair, all of those things? And then it's like, okay, well, that's a good faith actor.
And does it ignore blind spots or does it go straight at blind spots?
And if you find somebody who you think is useful, that you typically disagree with, give it an extensive read so that you can actually start to understand what's the fundamental source of disagreement. Because once they do that, it's fine, right? In fact, I really like having those people in my feed, right? Is because, like, oh, I know that his take on this or her take on this is going to be something I disagree with, but I know that the fundamental source of disagreement is something that we fundamentally disagree on, right? So, but everything after that, this is a good faith actor, right? Somebody who, for me, is steeped in the data and the literature and has all the, all that kind of, but that's my nerdishness. But that's the kind of thing that's how I'm trying to balance it is I'm looking for things where I have some basis to either take the blinders off my own eyes. That's the bias version, right? Find the thing where they write about something that you would disagree with them about, even if they generally agree with you, or vice versa. Or if you know something, or if you know someone who knows something, find out whether they're doing that competence. So those are my answers to the last piece about, how do I evaluate it?
So I want to return to the mechanics of this as well, but I want to address the listener question in terms of my approach as well, because you mentioned you started with a framework for sort of establishing a view of credibility and competence. I have a similar sensibility, but it hinges on a phrase you used a moment ago, and that is good faith. I think my overarching method is to try to find good faith argumentation, good faith analysis. And if I could sort of distill it into a single quote, it would come from Upton Sinclair, and that is, it's difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on his not understanding it. Right. So people that argue in good faith do not fall victim to that, or try to do things to not fall victim to that sensibility. Right. So I look for writers or sources who admit their mistakes, right, who demonstrate the capacity to learn and seem excited about it. I would put, a journalist we admire, Derek Thompson, in that category. He's so often in real time grappling with his learning and demonstrating that for his listeners and his readers in a way that demonstrates good faith, at least to me. I also look for people who are not in the business of selling you outrage, right? If you can see a business model based on outrage, then I think that's a source that you should be careful about listening to. And you sort of described that, a version of that a moment ago. But yeah, this good faith aspect is where I try to zero in on my discernment.
Yeah, no, those are great. I particularly like the don't. Again, and this is what, going back up the list, right?
Yeah.
When I first read the question, my first question was, well, what are you trying to do?
Yeah,
right?
what's your goal?
What's your goal, right? Because sadly, most people's goal is to find media sources that confirms their priors and tells them that they're good and their side is good.
Even
and
if
that
they
the
don't
other side
explicitly admit that goal.
No, but we that's what they do.
That's like infotainment, essentially.
Right? It's like, I'm looking for fandom, tribalism, right? I just want, and we've talked on here many times about how media has essentially become a form of tribal competition.
Yeah.
And so a lot of media is fundamentally about, well, I'm just satisfying tribes. And, again, and there's a tribe of people that are like us that are like, yeah, I just want to know what the good faith argument is, right? Inform me. But it's not huge. And, you can make a living providing that, but it is not the modal source of media.
And I think a piece of this, it's a related piece, but I also look at, I try to read broadly and places that don't comport to my existing worldview. And so when you're reading something you don't agree with, that feels uncomfortable. You have this physical sensation of discomfort. And I think as a reader, you need to push through that and know that it's a sign that there's actually some growth potential. And so often when you're reading or listening or watching to something that you don't agree with, an immediate impulse is to counter-argue. And I think there's a lot of value in counter-arguing, right? Because it forces you to sort of clarify your own thinking and engage in the issue. But if you find yourself impulsively counter-arguing, at least what I try to do in those instances is pause. Say, let's just put the counter-argument on the shelf for a moment and instead take the perspective of, assume for a moment that everything this person says is correct. And in a world where that's the case, what does it mean I'm wrong about?
Yeah.
And I think that's a useful thought exercise. It doesn't mean that's truth. Truth is always going to be somewhere in the middle, right? But I think that thought exercise, at least for me, it helps me kind of process the information in a way that feels like I'm attempting to engage with the issue in good faith.
Yeah, and for me, like, it's work to do that.
It is. It's effortful.
And I am aware that it is work, but, and I don't know if this is just something how I've somehow trained myself to think of this, or this is somehow just innate or whatever it is. There's a moment of excitement. I like the challenge. I like the fact that somebody is now raising things and I have to go, maybe they're right. And, I go through that exercise like, well, exactly. Are they right? What if they're right?
Yeah.
What does this mean? Or what assumptions are they making that I don't agree with?
Exactly.
What are the essential assumptions here? And all that kind of stuff. And the hard part is that, a lot of times I don't have the effort to really engage with it. So it's just kind of, ugh.
Yeah.
But on those moments when I do find somebody who has made an argument that is not one that I'm familiar with on a topic that I think I know something about, and you're like, oh, I didn't know that, right? Oh, that's actually interesting. So there's a statistical approach to things known as Bayesianism. And the Bayesian approach basically says, well, at any given moment, I have some belief about reality, right? And
your priors.
The jargon is in my prior, right? And then I get some new information, and based on how I evaluate that information, I update my priors. And personally, I find it thrilling when I update my priors.
Yes.
Right? Anything that moves a prior for me, like, that's just like, ooh, that's exciting.
Like a true economist.
Like that. I mean, it's like, it's,
no,
but it is.
I hear you.
It's, if you're saying, well, on a daily basis, what is most likely to bring me actual joy?
Yeah.
It's something that moves my priors.
I got to say, like, that's where we align. And that's what I love about you. And that's what I love about doing this show, right? Because when those moments happen in real time, when the recorder's on or whatever, it's
like, oh, I never thought that before.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Or something, the easiest one is just new studies, because there's not, I don't have an opinion about it or whatever it is. Oh, there's some new information. They did a really cool job. And, when I get to update my priors.
Yeah.
I now think the world works differently than I did a moment ago. And that's thrilling. And, one of the benefits of age and wisdom is you've gone through the cycle enough times to know that those you disagree with are frequently capable of moving your priors.
Absolutely.
Right? Now, they're frequently, some of them are not, right? Some of them you're just like, no, you're an idiot. I don't believe anything you say because you're a crank or a quack or whatever it is.
Yep.
But, you know, I try and just, they're just out, right? I don't pay attention to you anymore. Right. But, you know, for those who I'm like, you know, they've said something at least at some point that was interesting enough for me to give them another chance. Yeah, there's lots of times where it's like, no.
And that might be, so I was mentioning the method of reading broadly, right? And so seeking out sources that you disagree with, I think that's part of the mechanism, right? That source, that platform, or that person, and it's often an individual writer or thinker who moved your priors, right? And that's a person to pay attention to.
Yeah, and
like keep going back to that person.
Well, and you know, and if it was a one-off, sometimes it's true. Like somebody, you know, got lucky once,
yeah,
and then you read them again and again and again, and you're like, no.
Or they change over time,
or
right?
they change.
They respond to incentives in ways that you agree with or disagree with, and it's important to observe that as well.
Yeah, and I honestly think that one's probably a bigger part of why I, you know, if I were to say, well, who's been shaping my thinking on various topics over 20 plus years or whatever it is, you know, people ebb and flow.
Yep.
And a lot of time those ebbs and flows are very much, I think we've talked about by the social media feedback loop.
Yeah, all sorts of reasons why somebody could ebb and flow. You built a business on it, you're captured by that audience.
You know, the audience captures me and I just keep feeding them what they want.
Yeah.
And yeah, like I said, like my primary goal is to basically not pay any attention to people that are feeding an audience.
Yeah. And you use social media in your news
I
consumption.
use Twitter,
you use X, right? Yeah.
X, you know, and it usually, I mean, the basic reality was, you know, again, when I started thinking about this question is I'm like, well, I don't actually consume that much media, right? Like I don't watch television news. I don't listen to the radio for news. I don't read a newspaper.
And this is part of an answer to this question too. Yeah.
You know, I subscribe to all of it, right? Because I think it's important to exist in the world. But in terms of like my daily consumption, like, I mean, I see headlines, like, you know, I've got news on my phone and, you know, I'll scroll through a Twitter feed and hit like, you know, the Missoulian and the Oregonian and maybe something else. But the odds of the number of days where I actually click on a particular article, I mean, it's probably 4 times a week that I actually read an article on one of these sites. So you kind of soak in the information, right? I'm aware that there's fires in LA. I'm aware that Trump is being inaugurated, right? It just kind of percolates around you, right? So the key for me is really just, well, when something is happening, well, who do I go to explain, oh, like, you know, a few weeks ago, there was a threat of a government shutdown. I'm like, what's going on? We're shutting down the government? Like, okay, so then, but, you know, the beauty of information abundance is when I want to know, I can usually find the answer.
You can double click on most things.
Right? It's like, oh, like, you know, how many structures were burned in the fires?
Yeah.
Right? I'm like, I want to know the answer to that. It took me 10 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
I found the answer. So, you know, it's in terms of just news, right? Like what's happening in the world. The beauty of the information age is you just kind of marinate in it, right? And so you don't have to, that's not much of a cultivation, right? It's just there. The headlines are there. You'll learn about them. The real cultivation is when I have a question about a policy or what's happening politically or whatnot. That's when it's about, well, who do I go to? Who am I reading?
Yeah, and I think I'd like to add a piece to that marination point, and that is be careful to how you allow yourself to marinate, because if you find yourself sort of consumed with the outrage engine, right, that's not the right type of marination. The right type of marination is the general awareness. And then you mentioned a moment ago, like to sort of to go through the process, to put yourself in a position to have your priors change. Like that takes effort, right? And the only way I think you can free up that effort is if you allow that marination to happen at a distance. You could use a politics analogy and say, like, don't pay attention to the horse race, pay attention to the issues. the day-to-day, who said what on Twitter and all that BS, like, don't watch all of that. Don't allow yourself to fall for the catnip when actually the real issue is probably happening in a much harder place to find.
Exactly. Right. That is, and that's what that's why I don't marinate in, like, I'm just going to sit down and read a whole newspaper or watch and every once in a while I'm like, I should do these things because that's how I spent my childhood, right?
Yeah.
You read the newspaper.
That was a different product back then.
You watched the local news and then you watched the national news. And, that was kind of how you kind of got the details, right? And, I'm like, gosh, I should do that again or whatever it is. But then, I feel like, a lot of it is, I mean, the local news example is the easy one, right? It bleeds, it leads, right? And I'm not sure I actually need to know about.
Yeah, at the same time, I mean, we've talked about the decline of local news, and that's a whole nother radio show that we don't have time to get into, but it is important to be in tune with the local issues of governance because those are the ones that actually affect your life in a meaningful way.
Yeah, and I think if we go back 2 years on the prediction show, I was like, consume more local media. The beauty of local media, and the reason why local media is frequently more important than national media, although lots of local media is being corrupted by the same national forces, is national media is tribal, right? It is, so you got family, you got tribe, and tribe is basically anybody who kind of shares your interests, right? So, the national media sorting is very much like, oh, well, what tribe do I belong to? And they're going to kind of subscribe, I'll get my narrative and it will generally confirm my priors and all that kind of stuff. Sitting in the middle is the village, right? And when we talk about not hanging out in person, all that kind of stuff, that's the village dying, right? Us no longer having a concept of who we share space with because we're not out interacting with them. Right, so local news, because it's describing the village, helps me understand the village, and that can be the value in local news. Yeah. But because lots of particularly like local human interest stories, it's like, oh, these are my communities, right? But it's because we exist in this world of family and tribe. The village is frequently ignored until something like the LA wildfires, right? Village effects are really strong in Los Angeles right now, right? But they'll dissipate in short order and people will go back to their tribes. And historically, village and tribe were the same, right? Like, what sports teams did you support?
Yeah, the ones in your zone.
It was my high school.
It's like Ted Turner broke that system by putting the Atlanta Braves in every household.
And then everybody, then ESPN comes along and it's like, oh, instead of just watching whatever, when I was a kid, like the NFL games that you could see involved the local teams. Particularly when I moved to Boston.
Unless they were blacked out.
Unless they were blacked out, yeah. But, and this was the thing, I lived kind of in between San Francisco and Seattle. So you kind of got both of those, the Raiders, the Niners, and the Seahawks. That basically was who you could watch. Then I moved to Boston. And it's like, oh, you just get the Patriots game, right? Yeah. Like, no matter what, you get the Patriots game. Which at that time was very bad the first year and then very good after that. It's all reinforcing.
Yeah.
Like, well, what tribe do I join? Well, it's whatever my village tells me. And what we have now is this gap between tribe and village. It's fundamentally what broke during the internet age. Is, we talk polarization, media, all of this stuff is people pursuing tribe over village. And when you layer in the fact that we're not engaging with our village, we don't even understand the village anymore. And what we know from study after study after study, we've talked about it a million times, which is, you want to get rid of polarization and partisan animosity, all that kind of stuff. Just stick people in a room with each other.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
Because tribe feeds me misinformation about my village. Right? And so, if you want to, local media can be really important because it's supposed to be about my village. Now, again, because of media incentives, it's frequently still skewed. It's not as good as jury duty, right? Jury duty is the best way to learn about my village because I actually have to go sit with a random group of people. But, old school PTA or, church, although church is increasingly segregated as well. But, you have these old school things which drew broadly. And so I wasn't just basically living in a bubble of like-minded tribal people who happen to live in the same village. But yeah, so anyhow, that's the challenge with local media is if you can use it to learn about your village, it can be really powerful antidote against tribe.
Indeed. Gosh, we answered the question and then some. Nice job, Bryce.
Well, I mean, when I read it, I was like, is this a listener question? Because we could do a whole episode on just this.
Yeah, we could. And I think we maybe just did. As we close, a few shout outs. As I said, we're 7 days or 6 days. When this airs, we'll be just past our 7th anniversary. And there's loads of people to thank, but a few specific shout outs. Elizabeth Willie, you were the first person who said yes to this project. The Dean of the College of Business, Suzanne Tillman, has been a steadfast supporter. Jeff Petticord and his colleagues at First Security Bank, Debbie Dantic and her colleagues at Blackfoot Communications have been partners from the start. Nick Elliott at CED, John and Jenna Wicks at Drum Coffee, Isho Tamasweet here in the College of Business, Keely Larson, Maddie Jordan, Jeff Meese, Nick Mott, the good folks at MTPR. A heartfelt thanks to all of you folks who listen. I hope the show exposes you to new ideas and perspectives, and I hope you will be a part of the project of making us better in the years to come. So, Bryce, thanks as always to you. Thanks to the listeners, and I look forward to more cool people doing awesome things in 2025. Thanks for listening to A New Angle. If you like what we do and want to support us directly, please consider a subscription at anewanglepodcast.com. A New Angle is recorded at Studio 49, a generous gift from UM alums Michelle and Lauren Hansen. Our presenting sponsors are First Security Bank, Blackfoot Communications, and the University of Montana College of Business. Keely Larson is our producer. Maddie Jordan is our production assistant. VTO, Jeff Ament, and John Wicks made our music. And Jeff Meese is our master of all things sound. Thanks a lot, and see you next time.